from Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Ahead today from the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb provides this week's cattle market analysis. Among other things, he'll remark on Canada's announcement that it will impose tariffs on U.S. beef. Then K-State's Terry Hauser will talk about a major finding that could enhance the quality of bacon used at institutional food outlets and fast food restaurants. They've discovered that naturally smoked sugar serves as an excellent antioxidant for frozen bacon. Today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update features Extension Agricultural Agent Rickey Roberts of Marion County. And on this week's 4-H segment, K-State's Aliah Metrovich Seay talks with Jeff Wickman about the Cultural Adaptation Navigation webinar series. Here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Thanks for listening. This is Agriculture Today. For this week's Cattle Market Insight, we welcome in once again via phone from his office in Denver, the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb. And we've quite an array of things to get into this time around, Jim, including an announcement late last week that has amped up the concerns over trade and the impact on beef. More on that in a moment, but the cash market and the futures markets both finishing last week with a nice burst upward.
At the end of the week, last week, as you mentioned, Eric, we strengthened the futures market, especially on Friday, and the cash market followed right along. The packers stepped forward and bought some live cattle, and so we were down a little bit week over week, but most people anticipated we'd be down a little bit more. So we've worked through a lot of cattle, and in fact, 2 weeks ago, it looks like that was probably our largest federally inspected slaughter that will occur this year. We processed 666,000 head federally inspected. And that's the largest in 1 week since the summer of 2011. So we have worked through a lot of cattle, and I think there was a bit of a sigh of relief in the marketplace last week.
Is it fair to characterize the late week uptick as a turning point for the market then?
It's very difficult to have a clear turning point in the summertime, Eric, but we're certainly, I think, laying a base for that. We have really still quite a few cattle to process in July. We'll see how the demand profile works out. As you mentioned earlier, a lot of uncertainty in the export marketplace, and some of that can come back rather quickly into the demand side and put some pressure on prices. But from a supply side perspective, I think we're through the biggest kill levels for 2018.
Before we talk trade here, the feeder cattle market seems to be maintaining its strength at the auctions as well.
Heavyweight feeder cattle seem to be holding together. I think that's partly a reflection of the fed cattle market softening, but many people anticipated the last couple of weeks we would be below $1 a pound on fed cattle, and clearly we're $1.07, $1.08. And also, as we look forward here, the feeder cattle and the calf markets have been buffered somewhat by the declining feedstuff costs, and so that's played into the dynamic there. As you know, we haven't had a lot of calves traded yet. This isn't the time of year we have many calves moving to the marketplace. And in some of those markets, those were a little bit softer, but the feeder cattle were steady to $3 higher in most markets last week.
All right, to the headliner of the day. The announcement came out late last week that Canada intends to impose tariffs on a number of American products, including U.S. beef, in retaliation for the tariffs imposed by the U.S. on steel and aluminum. This resonates pretty loudly, doesn't it, Jim?
It does, and really this week it's still posturing in some sense, but the deadlines are coming quickly upon us. So Canada has put these in place as retaliation. To remind your audience, Canada is our 4th largest beef market. Now, at this time, most of it is targeted towards further processed beef items in terms of the frozen food items and much of the packaged food items, et cetera, that have beef in it. that's really targeting a very important sector of U.S. products that contain beef that are exported to Canada. So there's a lot of moving parts in these trade agreements and these arrangements, but certainly precarious is probably, at this week's point, a descriptor of where we might be.
Now, it is a fluid situation, as you're saying there, but if this plays out to its fullest potential extent, that could really hamper our price action.
It certainly can, Eric. We export over 12% of our beef, and, again, Canada is our fourth largest market. But around the world, these things, as we've already seen, tend to be iterative and retaliatory in nature, and so once the ball starts turning, we're not sure where it's going to stop, and so that will add uncertainty clearly into the marketplace and cause buyers to step back. And we have to remember, meat is largely a non-storable product, and so if we have buyers even step back for a week or two, there's kind of reverberations through the marketing chain. So we have to watch this very closely.
Some background information on competing meats, useful as we talk about beef demand's posture throughout the summer, which is always challenged by the other meats.
And especially, we can give a highlight of the Hogs and Pigs report, which came out last Thursday. And that was largely as anticipated by market analysts. We have, roughly 3% more hogs in the marketplace, and the producers continue to be very efficient. And that's as expected, but kind of the concern in that overall report was the number of breeding animals that are USDA reported, and that was about 100,000 head more than anticipated. So the market hogs and the expectations of farrowings were about as anticipated, but there's this kind of a dark spot called the breeding herd. Now, will that herd adjust over this summer to the extent that matches up with the farrowings? But clearly, we're on line to have year-over-year increases in the range of 2.5% to 3% in terms of pork output into the second quarter of 2019. One of the good factors there is that hog weights have sort of come back in line, so we're not getting as much increase in tonnage from the weights of hogs. Those have moderated. And on the poultry side, that industry continues to mark forward, but there is some, slowing down in the production system. But we have skinless, boneless chicken breast prices that are actually declining this time of year, Eric, and normally they're increasing during the grilling season. And then some of these export items in the poultry complex, especially the chicken legs and those products, have been very soft lately too and taken some additional pressure. So there's plenty of those competing meats in the domestic marketplace, and we're kind of concerned about how much more might be in the domestic marketplace because of international trade issues. So we're still ramping up, I think, into competing meats. Now, we look overall at that picture, though. We did pull back our forecast slightly. So the total supply of total red meat and poultry, mostly due to some adjustments in the chicken sector and the turkey sector, slightly down from what we estimated a couple months ago. So, that's a little bit of good news, but the competing meats, especially, as you mentioned, in the summertime, is really a key component to whether we can build from here in terms of cattle prices.
The takeaway, in part, though, is that if all of these trade concerns can be somehow resolved, that there is not this overwhelming amount of competing meat out there that would suppress the beef market to a great extent.
That's right, and in fact, we've pulled back some of these forecasts on competing meats, the domestic supply and the production levels, and I expect USDA will do the same in their upcoming reports as they did last month. So, there's a little bit less concern out there. And again, as you mentioned, the concern is this indirect impact from if we don't export it, must be consumed in the domestic marketplace.
And the USDA on Friday issued its row crop acreage report, and why that's important to the cattle sector. It gives an idea of where feed grain prices may end up as we get into the latter part of the year. Nothing revolutionary there, although it's obvious that corn acreage is down compared to previous years.
Corn acreage is down compared to previous years. Soybean acreage is down somewhat compared to last year. But importantly, the corn acreage came in well above the pre-report estimates. So we planted 500,000 acres more corn than we anticipated as market analysts. So that really is shaping the story. And then, as you well recognize, on a national basis, the weekly crop conditions reports have shown the corn crop is actually better than a year ago, at least in that kind of cursory assessment that comes kind of from a nationwide perspective. And we have this year about 12% of the corn in excellent category, and last year was 9%. And last year we had a record high corn yield. So we put together that larger than anticipated corn acres, and we really do have the supply underpinnings for why corn has fallen 40 cents a bushel compared to 5 weeks ago in the Omaha cash market. And soybean meal is down $66 a ton. So this is important, as you mentioned, because these are part of the cost of production for feedlots. And in fact, over the last 3 weeks, as the corn market and the corn quality looks like a good crop out there, we're going to have a year-to-year decline in the amount of corn available, but more than we anticipated, Eric. Mm-hmm. And that has caused us to raise our feeder cattle and calf price forecasts over the last 3 weeks. We raised our fourth quarter calf prices, for example, by $3 to $5 per hundredweight. That's pretty significant impact if we just look at the corn market interaction here, giving us a little bit of strength and really buffering, especially the yearling prices, from the fading over at least recent weeks in the live cattle marketplace. So this corn crop is still developing. It's still too early to call, but all signs at this point are, a good yielding crop, maybe a record large yielding crop, and more acres than we anticipated. This is shaped up pretty well from the livestock producer's perspective in terms of the potential here to support calf and yearling prices.
If it all comes to fruition, it'll be great for feeding margins, to be sure. So as for the trading week ahead of us, Jim, quite a few moving parts out there. What do you think the trades will react to?
Well, it'll react to this bigger, worldwide story in some sense. We have the 4th of July holiday in the middle of this week. It's always hard to tell how packers will position going into those, especially midweek holidays. But we have worked through a lot of cattle already. If we're not near the bottom of the live cattle market, we're very close with this kind of big picture uncertainty, Eric.
All right. Great insight as always. Jim, thank you, and we will catch up with you again soon.
It's been my pleasure, Eric.
With this week's comment on the cattle market factors, that's Jim Robb, the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, a project co-sponsored by K-State, among numerous land-grant universities. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today resumes now. And on this segment, we'll pass along to you new research information out of the Meat Science Department here at Kansas State University. And the objective here is to enhance what already is a highly popular meat product in this country. That would be bacon. Terry Hauser is with us. He's an extension meats specialist here at Kansas State. And you were invited to test out a product which you'll describe in just a moment, Terry, to improve bacon and reduce oxidation. But let's talk about the process itself and why it's so important to the quality of the product.
Well, Eric, oxidation is a natural process that occurs in all of our organic type of products that we have, our compounds. And basically what we're doing there is we're very scientifically losing electrons from a molecule. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that really, that's a little more science than we probably want to get into today, but it basically results in the production of off flavors, and that's what we really are concerned about with meat products. Most of the time when we think of preserving products, we think of their shelf life and fresh meats is from a microbial standpoint. However, when we get into cooked meats, or products that are frozen, we many times have product deficiencies in flavor over a period of time. Bacon is not generally stored frozen in a retail establishment, but when we get into using it in a restaurant or a food service establishment, oftentimes that product is stored or shipped and stored frozen until that particular restaurant would use the product. So In those instances, oxidation can be a problem because it is catalyzed in part by salt and freezing, and so those things are common when we're talking about bacon. So for the last several years, we've been working on what we call a food service layout style of bacon packaging. And unlike the packages you get in a retail store that might be vacuum packaged, the layout bacon is aerobically packaged or packaged in the presence of oxygen or in the ambient air.
So it's more prone to oxidation, right?
Yep, absolutely. So when we have oxygen present in the system, we have increased rates of that oxidation that can occur. We run into that more so when we talk about cooked meats because some of their lipids or fats have been changed in structure that make them more susceptible to oxidation. So that's why we're doing research in that area.
And what you've been doing specifically is evaluating a product that may be hopefully an answer to oxidation. This relates to the value of smoking meats, which we've talked of before, but broadly, that's a time-tested method of dealing with oxidation, you say?
Absolutely. We get several compounds formed when we smoke meat or we produce smoke from natural hardwoods, whether those be chips or sawdust. And one of those classifications of compounds are what we call phenolic compounds. Those phenolic compounds are responsible for the flavor quality of a product because they deter the oxidation process. And, of course, man has known that for an awful long time, right? It's nothing new that smoking meat adds a characteristic flavor and helps preserve it. So there's three main ways that we can control oxidation in products through ingredient addition. And one of those would be if we added a synthetic compound. That currently is not very favorable in the eyes of consumers. The second way would be if we would add an antioxidant from a smoke derivative, such as liquid smoke, a smoked sugar, or hardwood smoke. And the third would be that if we could add a plant extract, such as rosemary or oregano. Those are examples of extracts that would work pretty well there. So the last couple studies that we've been conducting actually used a naturally smoked sugar to impart some antioxidant activity in the bacon manufacturing process.
So let's talk of that because that's really at the core of the exciting news that you're passing along from this research. But when we say naturally smoked sugar, what does that infer, Terry?
So basically that process is done when we actually burn sawdust and apply a smoke to a actual sugar. So in this case, it would depend on the type of sugar, but generally sucrose or some type of cane sugar would be used in the process. So it's a lot like smoking salt. Smoked salt's been around for a while. People are familiar with that, or maybe familiar with that. So it's not really all that different from that process. So you can basically take sugar or some other sweetener, and you can actually add that smoke right to that. One of the benefits we have when we actually smoke an ingredient and then add the smoke that way is that we can get a deeper penetration than we can by just simply smoking a belly in a commercial smokehouse. When we smoke the entire belly, we only get a surface treatment on those products. So whenever we can add an ingredient and get it put into or injected into that particular product, such as a belly or the slab of bacon, we can get a lot more uniformity as far as our ingredient contact with most of the fats in that product.
Your intent, actually, 2 experiments that you've conducted with this particular naturally smoked sugar to see if, in fact, it achieves the end goal of reducing oxidation of the product. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the whole hypothesis. Again, those 2 experiments are completed, and we looked at oxidation from 3 standpoints. One of them was a subjective measurement using a sensory panel, which is 8 to 10 trained individuals that would taste the product. The other 2 methods were more objective. One of them is an assay that we use that finds small compounds that are called aldehydes that are products of lipid oxidation. And the third is a gas chromatography method that looks also at very, very specific molecules. All 3 of them told us the same answer, and that's always good in science when you can get it.
Consensus is good, isn't it?
It is. We don't usually like to rely on just one testing method, but when we can get all 3 of them to tell us the same answer, then we're pretty confident in those results. So as we get to those results, basically when we added an antioxidant to these bacon formulations, it really extended our shelf life over the frozen storage period, which in this case we tested these products out to 120 days of frozen storage. Now, it's really important to note that we had significant oxidation in the first 20 to 40 days of frozen storage for these bacon products. Eric, that has a lot of implications, especially for some of our small processors who actually freeze their bacon and sell it frozen. It does not seem, unless we use a vacuum package, that we can get shelf life much longer than probably 40 days on frozen bacon. And many of your listeners might know this firsthand, that sometimes when they buy some bacon or pork in general and they leave it in the freezer too long, it gets a weird flavor to it.
Right.
And that flavor, those flavor changes are oxidation. I mean, that's what oxidation does. And so we definitely don't want that in our bacon products. There's no doubt in my mind that if we're going to have cured products or cured and cooked products, such as ham, bacon, any of those types of products, we do need to have an antioxidant in those formulations other than nitrite to help combat this. Nitrite's great and it's very effective, but we really need, it seems like that we need some more help in that area.
So there may be hope that this particular product could be applied to other meats, frankly, as an antioxidizing product.
Yep, absolutely. And we can use anything that's cooked, anything that's cured with nitrite or other natural curing compounds. It does appear that this is very, very effective and would increase their shelf life.
Mm-hmm. And presumably, as far as palatability of the product, it still rates pretty highly.
Oh, absolutely. The one nice thing, so again, there's several compounds that we can use for antioxidants. The one nice thing about naturally smoked sugar is that we expect to have smoke as a flavor constituent of bacon, ham, some of our other smoked products. So it actually probably adds other flavor constituents that are pleasing to the consumer. Mm-hmm. So you probably get a bit of a double whammy there with using that product. But again, there are other natural antioxidants that we can use or other antioxidants we could use from, again, our research. There's no doubt in my mind that as long as you're able to get them into the product, which there's some solubility issues there because we're adding a water brine to these products. So oils aren't necessarily as good of products to use, but anything that would be water soluble that we could actually get it injected into the bacon, we're probably going to see a benefit.
Nonetheless, though, you're especially excited about these findings.
Yes, absolutely.
This antioxidant.
Yep. And it has the opportunity, for food service establishments such as, Denny's or IHOP or Perkins or those guys that go through a lot of bacon, this is really important. Because oftentimes, when we talked about the 30 or 40 days of shelf life we might have without an antioxidant, oftentimes they never even see that bacon until it may be already oxidized in that packaging format. Yeah. So when the quality of our products are better, everybody wins on these deals. And especially with the price of bacon, well, bellies and bacon. Bellies are, one of the most highest price cuts of the pig right now. And bacon is very expensive, and we definitely want consumers to have good eating experiences, so they're going to come back and buy more of that product.
Bacon is definitely a favored product out there amongst our consumers, and so any way we can find to make it a better eating experience yet is all the more welcome, and we appreciate the report on this work. Congratulations on the findings, Terry. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eric. Always a pleasure to visit with you.
Likewise. Once more, they were testing out the merits of this antioxidant product called naturally smoked sugar as an antioxidizing agent to help bacon's quality along, and they found that, in fact, this product performs quite highly in that regard. Terry Hauser, meats specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And we'll be back with more. This is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today is back now here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you. Today's wheat harvest update lets us know how harvest has progressed, probably toward conclusion now, in Marion County, toward the central part of the state. Extension agricultural agent there, Rickey Roberts, filling us in. So, in fact, are your farmers done cutting in Marion County, Rickey?
Yeah, the wheat harvest is over for 2018, yes.
So just an idea of what you and your producers were thinking this harvest would produce going in. Was there optimism or was it somewhat muted?
No, we had a really tough growing season. We could take that all the way back to last fall, Eric, and we had a really dry fall. Some of that wheat really went and dusted in. It was just that bad. And, all winter long, it stayed dry. Some of that wheat just barely made it out of the furrows even. And we were real concerned about winter kill and all kinds of things on some of that later planted wheat. As we progressed into the spring, the wheat greened back up, and we were encouraged by that a little bit. But to be honest with you, the rains just never came, okay? And so even through the spring, it really continued to stay dry. And we finally did get some rains very, very late in the growing season. But by that time, for the bulk of the crop, it was just too late.
So that's been showing up in your yields and test weights, presumably?
Yeah. I mean, let's just put it this way. I mean, for the most part, this is a wheat crop we would just as soon forget. We had some poor yields. Matter of fact, in some parts in the county, up to the northwest corner of the county, the wheat just got baled up. Our feed situation is still a bit uncertain, but was very uncertain at that point. Some guys decided that they needed the feed worse, and they went ahead and baled it up. But anyway, it was when the numbers are completely reported as far as to the USDA for program payment purposes and so forth, I don't know what the county average is going to wind up, but it would certainly be my guess that it's not going to be much more than low 30s or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Which is substandard certainly for Marion County as you go back.
Yeah. We've been spoiled. We can grow 50 bushel wheat. We've done that quite a bit. 45, 50 bushel wheat's not that uncommon for us in today's genetics and with today's practices, but it's not going to happen this year.
In that, have any of your producers gone back in and tried to make something of that acreage with a double crop this year? The moisture has been a little bit of a question, of course. Yeah,
and we have to be honest with you, we just have to. As agricultural operators, we're always the eternal optimists, and we have to be that way. I would tell you this year that largely what we went back in there was some kind of a forage crop, because our feeding situation going into winter looks so uncertain that we're going to need all the feed we can get our hands on, I think. Yep. And so, we have done a lot of that. There is still the traditional double crop beans and even a handful of milo acres and so forth. But, I bet this year we went in with more forage and hay with more feed crops than maybe about anything.
So your producers are moving on there with not only those follow-up feed crops, but with their timely planted row crops, and hopefully a rain or two has come through to get those off and rolling.
Well, we've had just enough rain to keep us going, okay? We're still dry here. Our stock ponds are dry for the most part. But we have had just enough rain to keep the corn going. The north end of the county is in pretty tough shape. I'm not sure what the outlook on that crop is as we speak today, but we've had just enough to keep it going, and I think we're going to be able to kind of salvage the corn crop. I don't know whether it's going to be a lot better than salvage crop at this point, but here we still need more rain, and if we can grab in here, it's going to be real important to grab some more July rain if we can get it anyway.
You bet. Moving on from the 2018 wheat harvest, which again in Marion County was less than desired, but at least it's done. Rickey, appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Rickey Roberts, Extension Agricultural Agent in Marion County, with today's wheat harvest update. Next up on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of Tree Tales. Here's K-State Forester Charlie Barden. Charlie?
Some people think tree pruning should only be done in late winter or early spring, which is true if you're trying to encourage more growth on young trees or the annual pruning done on producing fruit trees. However, many older shade trees in the home landscape are large enough, and an early summer pruning will help reduce their crown size. As branches get heavier with new foliage, they may be dragging against the shingles of your roof or hanging low and getting in the way of mowing your lawn or blocking the view at the end of your driveway. I give a light pruning to a young elm tree in my yard each June. It provides wonderful shade to our deck all summer. When the branches blow in the wind, they can rub against the house. Thus, the reasons to conduct summer pruning are to reduce the size or slow the growth of a tree, or to remove branches that have just become troublesome. Some advantages to pruning in early summer are that the wounds begin to heal over very quickly at this time of year because the cambium is actively growing. Also, if you've been concerned with the bleeding or excess sap flow that comes from some maples and elms and other trees when pruning in early spring, by simply delaying pruning until the leaves are fully expanded, the wound will not bleed. This is especially helpful if the branches hang over a patio area and you do not want sap dripping onto the outdoor furniture. If you have smaller trees to prune, say just to remove a few lower branches, a pair of lopping shears or small handsaw will do the job well. In most cases, it is best to remove the branch entirely back to the trunk instead of cutting it off halfway out. When removing the entire branch, it is important to cut it off just outside the branch collar. This will result in a circular wound but not leave a stub sticking out. The tree will grow quickly over this wound in a couple of years, depending on the diameter of the tree and the size of the removed branch. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden, Forest for K-State Research and Extension.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll return in a moment on this, the K-State Radio Network. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. The mission of Kansas 4-H is to create programming that serves the needs of each community and recruit and retain new audiences that reflect the state's changing demographics. As part of that mission, Kansas 4-H offers staff, volunteers, and community partners access to research-based information about how to build a cultural sensitivity and awareness about underrepresented and underserved audiences. According to new youth and adult audiences specialist Aliah Metrovich Seay, a series of Cultural Adaptation Navigator webinars are available on the Kansas 4-H website.
That is correct, yes. We offer different webinar options that are recorded. We have all different types of webinars that allow people to learn how to navigate cross-cultural differences, whether it be working with youth with autism at camp, in a camp environment, or if it is looking at bringing in new youth and adult audiences to community clubs and other types of extension programming. We have those webinars available.
We hear a lot about being culturally sensitive. This just kind of outlines things that agents and specialists could do?
Yes, definitely in regards to building more self-awareness. The more awareness we have of our own cultural selves, understanding that we are cultural beings, and that as we're learning more about ourselves, we can be more capable of understanding others and other identities other than our own. So those webinars allow us to dig deeper and really begin to reflect more and commit to a process of successfully navigating across difference.
I know one of the webinars is Understanding Culture and the Self, another is Ages and Stages. What are learned there?
Understanding culture and the self is just a way to begin to look at the different diversity dimensions that make up who we are, whether it's gender, socioeconomic status, ability status. Even if we're a first-generation college student, just really looking at the multiplicity of identities that make us who we are. That is cultural self-awareness. Now, Ages and Stages, the cultural edition, allows us to look at youth from different backgrounds, particularly different ethnic backgrounds, even gender identities, and see how we can approach learning with them based on the age that they are. For example, a lot of times there are some youth from different ethnic backgrounds that respond really well to storytelling as a way of learning. So how I would approach storytelling with a youth who is 7 is going to be very different than a youth who is 15. So it just kind of begins to address those nuances in culturally responsive pedagogy.
Another of your webinars deals with understanding the culture of poverty.
Yeah, so we have subject matter experts and cultural advocates or navigators for every single one of our webinars. In particular, for that one, we had Dr. Elaine Johannes from the College of Human Ecology talk about poverty and her research with poverty. And we also had a K-State alum who had experienced homelessness share her story during the webinar, what it was like to be a graduate assistant and also be homeless. So we have some really great dialoguing going on, and there's just a lot to be learned there.
Another deals with innovation in volunteerism. What's the focus there?
There, it's just a new way to approach volunteerism. We did have also some subject matter experts kind of going through ways of engaging new audiences in volunteering that might not be the status quo or what we're used to within our own kind of scope of influence. This is about expanding our scope and finding innovative ways to engage people that are perhaps different than we are and might be motivated to volunteer for different reasons than we're used to.
And you also have an autism toolkit that can be viewed.
Yes, that's right. And during that time, we had the autism coordinator of USD 383 here in Riley County talk to us, along with a person who is on the autism spectrum that advocates for people with autism. So it's a very personal approach to learning about these different cultural communities.
These are often things that we don't necessarily think of 4-H as doing, so it's really kind of nice to know that they're kind of on the forefront of this.
Yes, I would say that we're committed to widening the circle and making sure that all youth are included in our programming. And this is just one way that we're going about raising awareness through our community members to be able to provide inclusive programming to all.
Kind of along those same lines, soon there will be some guidelines coming out for persons with disabilities in 4-H events, some things that 4-H agents and specialists can keep in mind.
Yeah, so I'd really like people to be on the lookout for this. This will be in the staff section of our website. This is particularly for agents. It's a program accessibility guideline for persons with disabilities in 4-H events. It'll really be a roadmap for agents to begin to understand and define what reasonable accommodations are related to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and really a step-by-step process on how accommodations are prescribed with the support of the State 4-H office along with the Access Center at K-State. We work very, very closely with the Access Center that is actually a place where accessibility specialists work and help us prescribe those accommodations to our youth and to other folks that might be at a 4-H event that may need accommodations. So in knowing how we can collaborate with the State 4-H office and the Access Center, we're really paving the way for youth with disabilities to receive reasonable accommodation and in a timely manner. You know, sometimes we have to think really fast when we're an agent in a situation with youth, and so this is going to help prepare us to know who to call, who to connect with, so that, you know, if a youth with a disability comes to an event, they will be able to receive the accommodations needed to be engaged, just like any other youth.
And also an opportunity to remind people that if they have a child who has a disability, that if they contact the agent in advance, they can make those accommodations.
That's correct. Yes, we are definitely bound by making sure we follow the Americans with Disabilities Act. Contacting the agent ahead of time just allows us to put reasonable accommodations in place and double and triple check those accommodations. But youth with disabilities are always welcome, and we will always try to provide accommodations, whether the youth lets us know ahead of time or not. But yes, notifying us ahead of time is always best.
If somebody wants to find out more information along these lines, how can they find that information?
They would want to contact the Kansas State 4-H office, and this accessibility document will be available by the end of the summer.
That's Kansas 4-H New Youth and Adult Audiences Specialist Aliah Metrovich Seay. To learn more about building a cultural sensitivity and awareness in your community, visit kansas4h.org. County Fair season begins this month and continues well into August. As part of our Kansas 4-H update, we'll list the county fairs taking place that week. While there aren't any fairs this week, the Edwards and Brown County Fairs begin a week from today in Kinsley and Horton. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.